Hi there, my name is Daniel Silke. I'm a political economy analyst and I serve a number of clients with presentations on the global African and South African economy and the political connections to that economy. I like to draw a link between politics and economics. Now, the times that we are in are unprecedented. The coronavirus is affecting every single aspect of business, the broader economy clearly, and probably also will have profound political implications over the course of the next few years or so. What I want to do with you here in the short videos, provide you just some of the updated issues that I'm covering in my presentations. It's something of a moving target, I must tell you. And I think for every analyst, every hour of the day presents new data, new research, and of course, new nuances and trend lines to follow. So it's quite difficult to get a complete handle on where we are at the moment, but I'll do my best just to give you a very short sampler of some of the issues that I'm covering with clients currently. So sit back and relax if you can, and I'll just take you to a few of my more relevant slides that I'm going to introduce you to. Firstly, let me just say that it doesn't matter, how clever you think you are. There are many, many variables in this broader discussion, and we simply don't have the answer for many of them as I sit here on the 1st of April. The first key issue that will influence whatever we do in the next 18 months or so is the issue of a suitable vaccine for COVID-19. Now that can be a game changer, obviously, and obviously for the better. But in the absence of a vaccine at the moment, we clearly are in a very unstable period. And given that a vaccine can take up to 18 months, that instability will probably last at least 18 months as we battle to get huge quantities of a suitable vaccine rolled out to most of the world. With the stagnation in business, clearly, it means a very rocky environment. But the good news is that there's a race to find a vaccine, and that certainly is underway. Secondly, the big variable to me, certainly in the more short term, is even if we put a lid on the incidence of COVID-19 in the short term, even if we flatten the curve, as it is, so to speak, it can rear its head, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere's winter months, November, December of this year, and perhaps even into early next year. So we are likely to see, to some degree, the regulations on our personal liberties and freedoms of movement, the social distancing that we're beginning to become acquainted with, we are likely to see that maintained in part, perhaps in a stop-start fashion, over the course of the next 6 months or so, creating a very difficult environment until one really gets a handle on keeping this under control. We are going to continue to see high levels of volatility and high levels of insecurity as well. The third variable to me is more on the medical side, on the virus side. What is the nature of the virus, and can it mutate? Can there be different versions of the virus that can in fact delay a suitable vaccine? That's something for the scientists and virologists to talk about, but it can be a factor that delays recovery. So when you take those three big issues, they really are disclaimers that whatever one says is certainly dependent upon some very big issues that specialists will be looking at over the next 6 months or so, right now and over the next 6 months. But let's just go to what we know, because what we can deal with are the facts currently presented. And I'm just going to use two charts from the Financial Times, an excellent source, by the way, for you. Some of this coronavirus information is now available complimentary on their website. But I just want to indicate to you that the worst is still to come in terms of the amount of deaths that we are going to see. It's tragic, but I suppose from an analytical point of view, it's not surprising because we've had a buildup of cases for the last 2 months or so. Those cases are resulting in a number of hospitalizations, and clearly of that, there are a number of deaths and some very dramatic death rates coming out of Italy and Spain, unfortunately, probably from the United Kingdom, and certainly from the United States, where anywhere above 100,000 deaths could well occur just in the course of the next few months or so. So from an analytical point of view and a business point of view, the next 4 to 8 weeks are going to be the worst. And you've simply got to expect a plethora of terrible statistics and news reports to come your way through every medium in this next period. We are almost at the pinnacle of this first stage of the pandemic, and therefore it really is going to get worse before it gets better. Getting better is important, and it's not just important because we think that we can get better. There are some statistics that indicate that these curves are beginning to flatten. We are starting to see a reduction in the rate of increase of new confirmed cases. And that is encouraging, albeit only at an initial stage. And you can just see there, those new rates of the virus in Italy are beginning to soften a little bit. In other words, a lower percentage on a daily basis are becoming confirmed cases. You can see the same occurring in Spain. Even in the US, at a rather dismal level, I might add, in terms of total numbers of confirmed cases, there is something of a softening of the curve there. We haven't quite seen it in the UK as yet, but it is at least a positive trend that perhaps we're just at the beginnings of. So we'll watch that and hope that that will continue into the future. But clearly the big effect, other than on health and on the families of those who face complete disruption as a result of this, has been on the broader global economy. It's been so rapid, and that's been the key feature here. The rapidity of the complete decline in both the supply and production side of the economy has left large parts of the world simply locked down under extreme social distancing regulations. It stopped business in its tracks. And you can just see here from this first of the many graphs that we are going to see over the next few months or so, which measure the various economic indicators on which we base our projections. You can just see, and just look at that spike in US unemployment claims on the right-hand side of that graph. It just hasn't been seen for the last 40 years or so when you look at this particular timeline. And of course we know the social implications for unemployment are dramatic, additional pressure on state coffers to provide benefits, and there are also deep-rooted social implications within families as well. Mental health well-being is going to be a feature of discussion, and the state is going to have to deploy many, many resources to combat the negative effects. This is all going to be borne out in the broad GDP figures for the world this year. Most of the research houses are forecasting a global recession, which really means negative growth for at least 2 quarters. When you look at this projection from Moody's, you'll see that they are projecting the United States at a minus 2% GDP figure for 2020. I mean, that's astonishing given the exceptional growth we've seen in the US over the last decade or so. Similarly, so minus 2.6% GDP in the UK, minus 3% in Germany, and China's growth expected to halve from just under 6% to perhaps 3% or so. I mean, these are very dramatic declines. And in the Southern Hemisphere, where we have perhaps more developing economies, you can just see Brazil in recessionary territory, and South Africa, where I am based, already suffering as a result of a recession, going into an even deeper and perhaps more long-lived recession for the rest of the year or so. It is my view that it may not just be Q2 and Q3 where there's negative growth. We might even see negative growth still in Q4, although that's going to be based upon some of the variables that I've mentioned earlier. So a very difficult ride for the world in 2020 with only a moderate uptick in 2021. Just a quick message to my fellow colleagues across the African continent: you are indeed more vulnerable. We all know that medical supplies on the continent, state healthcare sectors are very poor in terms of available ventilators, in terms of hospital beds per 1,000 head of the population. Living conditions are poor, large families, multi-generational families living in relatively small square meterage space in many favelas and shanty towns in these urban conurbations around the African continent. And of course, African countries just don't have the institutional firepower, the ability to inject capital into their economies without borrowing extensive amounts from international global agencies. So that power of the fiscus, those cash reserves, just not available that compared to what they would be in the United States or in the EU for that matter. And even for the wealthy countries like the US and the EU, they probably will have to put in a number of further tranches of financial aid into their respective economies Africa won't be able to do it. It will be a case of having to borrow even more on already over-indebted balance sheets within their economy. Finally, this is a slide. It's a complex slide. It's got a lot of detail in it. And it's one that I would go through in much more detail with the client and flesh out some of the many variables and perhaps look at with a client how they see their business fitting in to these 9 different scenarios in terms of the overall economic impact of COVID-19. There are 3 sort of different horizontal lines here. The top line indicates the better predictions. The middle line indicates the average predictions, perhaps the iffy predictions, perhaps the realistic predictions in my book. And the bottom horizontal 3 options indicates the more negative or worst case scenarios that could apply. Now, I think different industries are going to have different levels of impact of COVID-19. And clearly those industries that are service-based, that are in the travel, hotel, leisure markets, those are going to be particularly hard hit for an extended period of time. Aspects of retail will as well, but aspects of retail providing essentials will have a different trajectory path to recovery. So there's not a one-size-fits-all here. Just to quickly highlight to you, and let me just get the highlighter here since I'm highlighting, just 3 scenarios that I would like to suggest to you. The better scenario here, where your virus is contained and there's a slow recovery there, taking us to where we almost were at the beginning of the year. Well, that's a more optimistic view, in my view. I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with it. The more pessimistic view here at the bottom indicates that the pandemic escalates. And as a result of that escalation, there's very slow progress. We bottomed out for a long time. I mean, this is a little bit like an L-shaped recovery where you have a sharp downturn and you just have a flat line almost until there's eventually some kind of recovery. That's pretty grim, and I don't necessarily buy into that, although I do think that there will be some industries that may well find their path more akin to this rather negative scenario. The one that I think perhaps for me anyway at the moment on the 1st of April is this one that we should look at and concentrate more on. It really shows that where we have this virus, we have this drop in business activity, this flatlining, which is represented here on the graph. But as we grapple to manage the virus until a vaccine is found, we have many ups and downs over an elongated period. And I think you can see here that this graph sort of waxes and wanes up and down, starts to show some green shoots, and sort of ends where we just sort of can breathe again. But that's only, in my view, after a successful vaccine has been rolled out and after rescue packages have found real effectiveness in their respective economies. So there's some ifs to this one as well, but frankly, I put a 3-year, if not longer, time frame on getting to where we are from now to a world that looks a little bit better, but it may well be a different world, and that's something to discuss as well. So, I hope that it's given you some food for thought in a sense as to some of the issues that I'm going to cover. It's a very fast-changing environment. I don't think any of us analysts have lived through such dramatic times where the permutations of the future look so different. I would be wary to rewrite history already, I must tell you, but I do think that we are looking at a fundamental shock to the system that's going to take a number of years to come right, and even then, we are going to see some fairly dramatic changes in the way we do business and talk politics after this pandemic has been controlled. My name is Daniel Silke. My website, www.danielsilkeglobal.com. I hope you'll join me, perhaps for more detailed briefings, and I'll be updating this over the course of the next few weeks as well online. Thank you very much for listening to me and taking time out from your schedule to perhaps get some information from this presentation.